Question number 26 of the PhilNITS FE morning portion of the exam. In this question, we are being asked, which of the following is the network utility that is used to check detailed TCP connection information of the host? This question gives us several choices, and I think it's a bit tricky to find out what would be the correct answer. But somehow I got to C, which is netstat. And I was thinking that maybe it was because I thought that netstat was supposed to be another TCP connection information related command. But somehow it was actually quite different, and yet it was the correct answer. If we look at the other choices, ARP, I thought was not something that I'm familiar with or something that I would often use when I'm dealing with networking. So I didn't think too much about this one. The other choices, ipconfig, I thought could be the likely answer, but maybe because it had something, the question had something that I thought maybe more of the host, maybe more of the server. If you look at the word host here, seems like we need to connect to the server. And if we're using the computer, a client computer, then ipconfig would be okay. But if the host that we are talking about is another computer and we're using a client computer that connects to that server, then ipconfig might not be the way to go. Except that actually, if we investigate what's supposed to be the correct answer, which is netstat, then it seems like uh, we are actually dealing with the host already. Except that it seems that the TCP connection information that we are going for is not quite like the information that we get from ipconfig. And I'll show you in a while what the command does when we input them, when we enter them in the command prompt. Now the last choice, ping, is something that I've used and I still use, especially when I want to know whether I can connect to the server or not, whether the IP address of the server is reachable or not. But I think that really, when I narrowed down the choices, it was either B or C. So let's see why it's C and not B. First, ipconfig. If you enter this command in command prompt, if you're using Windows, you'd get this list, and the IP address could look something like this, with the subnet mask and the default gateway in this way as well. So 192.168.1.5 is an example IP address. Of course, maybe in your own network you'll be using something else, but I think if you've ever worked on computers and networking, maybe you need to connect two computers to the router so that they can access the internet, then this set of numbers should be somehow familiar with you. Now, what about ping? If you enter ping and an IP address, maybe this one is the server's IP address, 192.168.1.19, then you get a response. If you can reach the server and you can ping it, then it'll tell you there's a reply. Otherwise, maybe what you'll get would be the IP address is not reachable. Okay. Regarding the ARP, address resolution protocol, I had to look this up, and says that it's used to map an IP address to a MAC address. We know that devices would have a MAC address, and in that way we know whether a machine is connecting to an address somewhere. And of course, the MAC address shouldn't be changeable, although we know that there are definitely ways to alter it. But in most cases, I think it would be the IP address that would be the usual one that will be changing, especially, for example, if you want to maintain an IP address for this specific computer, while the other ones you want them to have whatever IP address is available, and not necessarily keep a specific address, then IP address I think would be the one that usually changes and not the MAC address. And if we investigate what about the network layer address and the data link layer, what about those things? And turns out that if you remember the open systems interconnection model, the open systems interconnection model, or OSI model, we'd have several of these layers. And the idea is if we got the machine, afterwards somewhere higher we got the data link layer. And I think from the Amazon Web Service explanation, we can think of the data link layer as more of the communications part. Of course, we got the devices in the physical layer, and then we need some way to connect them together. But of course, the network layer is also there. And as we go up the layer, really what we need to think about is that we are moving away from the hardware and more of those things that I think would be a lot closer to what humans could readily understand. So we got physical layer, data link layer, network layer, and so on and so forth here. And that's why also to the right part we got somehow the idea on how we can use these things, uh, or maybe I think how we should think about those things when we apply them in our whatever business related context that we are working on. So, given that, the ARP gives us information, um, but not necessarily what we are going for. I think we need to look into NetStat to understand the connection information that we are looking for. And what we find is that NetStat, if you enter the NetStat command, we get something like this. It shows us the active connections, connections that we've established with, and for example, those that are time wait, or I think there would be active state as well. And if we're looking for connection information, who's connecting to this computer, which computers are being connected to by this computer that we're at right now, that we're using right now, then we can use NetStat for that. And I think that's what we are definitely looking for um, in our answer for this question. Now, I was saying at the start that I was thinking that NetStat would be tracert. because I remember using Tracert, and I thought that if we needed to know the connection route to google.com, then that's one way that we can get information on the connections that we need to establish. For example, we're starting first with where we're at 192.168.1.5. How do we get to Google? And what we can see is that we need to move from one device to another. And later on, we see that we are going to go to pldd.net, and then another IP address, another address from pldd.net, and another one here as well, until we reach google.com. Now, I think that if you really want to look up the location, there is a way to find out whether google.com is in Singapore. Is that the server that we're connecting to, or is it somewhere else? I remember that if google.com is this IP address, then it looks like we are connecting to a place here in Asia, likely Singapore, because that should be closest to us. And then, of course, we know that there are people who use some kind of tool to hide their location, and because of that, it sometimes becomes difficult to figure out where exactly is the computer located. But in certain cases, like in this case, we can find that, for example, we need to connect to pldd.net, and if we look up where exactly are these addresses located, maybe we'll find that it's in Taguig City, in BGC or somewhere. I think I remember doing something like that before, and I found that they had an office, PLDT office there. So that's one way we can find the location of the computer. Okay, so having said that, in fact, what we needed was to find out what are the connection information, or what are the connections that a host computer currently has. And to do that, we need to use the netstat command. Therefore, the correct answer for this question is letter C.